Hi everybody. Wow is all I can say, because this is like absolute confirmation of everything that we've been saying right from the start about this banking crash and the levels of fraud and theft that have been going on. Now, recently I made a video, I'll leave the link underneath, about corporate communism and socio-capitalism, and saying, which way do we choose, death or life? Because corporate communism, it is the death culture. It is a creation of the death culture, and that's where it is heading. It is literally doom and gloom all the way, save for the elitist few that are riding high on it all. But one thing that I've explained in that video is how this corporate conspiracy, this global corporate conspiracy that is happening right now, and that is controlled, we know, by a handful of people, with every big corporation owning countless subsidiaries that have their tentacles into every single society. And since this banking collapse, they seem to have just gained even more power. And so one of the things that I've explained in my other video, which is quite a long video because I'm connecting a lot of dots in that in order to try and provide some enlightenment out there amongst the countless other people that are sharing equally valid information through YouTube. Because let's face it, the mainstream media just isn't doing its job, is it? In fact, it's doing the opposite of its job. But one of the things that I've explained is that corporate capitalism, they call themselves capitalists, but actually what they're rolling out amounts to corporate communism. So, so then I've juxtaposed that against socialism and said, well, also these people are anti-socialism against people who aren't anti-capitalist, you see, because that's one of, the other point that I make is that after World War II, the people of Britain, they didn't establish a socialist society in the sense of like communist Russia, okay, or in the sense of like Hitler's idea of socialism. We established a socio-capitalist society, and at that time Britain had nationally owned industries and services, and also privately owned industries and services. But where it all fell apart was because the banks were, we didn't really have, well, we did have some national banks, but they disappeared with Thatcher when everything suddenly started getting corporate. Like we used to have, most corner shops were individually owned. We had lots of individually owned businesses in Britain, individually owned factories, and they were all operating in Britain, and they were providing jobs for British people, and they were providing a living wage. The majority of the workforce didn't also have to go and apply for housing benefit, and there was no such thing as council tax. People who were renting a house, the rates for the house might be incorporated in the rent, but ultimately it was always the landlord that was responsible for the rates. And the rates were higher according to the value of the housing. So in the total upmarket areas, then rates would be very high, and in the poorer areas, then rates would be lower. That was how it worked. There was no such thing as this council tax thing where every individual has to pay council tax, which it was an outrage to impose it on the person, but there you go, it happened. But that's what I was explaining, is that the way the corporate works is that small and large independently owned businesses are prohibited. But they don't prohibit them by law as they did in Soviet Russia. They prohibit them by dirty tricks. And they have been asset stripping, like literally bankrupting firms, bankrupting businesses in order to asset strip them. And I am, you know, it is literally that they've used this bank. I believe they've orchestrated this banking collapse by removing all the legislations, removing the legislations that prohibited usury. You know, well, didn't prohibit it, but set limitations on usury in terms of interest rates. But when they did all this de-legislation, that they really did unleash a monster onto our planet and into our worlds, and they knew what they were doing. They knew what they were doing. They knew what would happen. But it was like a free-for-all. And so it actually becomes profitable to destroy the independently owned businesses. And then, meanwhile, the people that have set them free to do that, to profit from doing that, then the big corporations step in with their subsidiaries and start taking over it all. And even to the extent of, you know, our services, providing our transport, providing our trains, but, you know, but always the public are going to lose out, because the public are not only having to pay for the service and the costs of running it and the little bit of profit that's needed to maintain it all. Instead, they've got this corporate monster behind it all, constantly wanting more and more and more and more, and every year profits have got to go up and up and up and up, so the prices have to go up and up and up and up, or the service has to become less and less and less and less, and they're going to be employing less people and paying less of a wage, and hours are going to be longer and workloads are going to be heavier. That is what is going on. That is what is going on in Britain right now. And this video, you know, this just explains it all perfectly. It's just explained how £100 million independently owned business in Britain had a £10 million loan, you know, a business with assets worth 100 million, has a £10 million loan off the bank. The bank calls in the loan suddenly, which they can at any point. Say, right, we want you to pay this loan. Obviously the person can't come up with 10 million. Then they have to start selling things, and they have to sell, and suddenly it's sold really cheap. And then that business is gone. Boom, where's it gone? They literally are like, you know, a flock of vultures. So we've got this, you know, Lloyds Bank Castle Park BSU branch involved in £1 billion fraud. And I tell you, that's not the only bank. That's not the only one. They've all been at it, we know it. They should have been prosecuted. They should never have been bailed out. They have wreaked such havoc on Britain, and that's why people like myself are so disheartened to witness how how quick people were to, vote Brexit, and all on the strength of hatred against their fellow British citizens, and immigrants. It was just so disgusting to witness that instead of uniting, like the people of Iceland did, and facing the camel and refusing to swallow it, instead of straining at gnats, the camel, the true people that are robbing us of our culture and turning Britain into another corporate farm. And that's what the Yellow Vest movement in France is about challenging that corporate takeover. That British people, it's like, it's just happened here, really. And yeah, there's been people making a fuss about it, but really not enough unity and not enough solid agreement among people about the real cause of our problems, which isn't Muslims and it's not immigrants, it's this banking system and the total lack of legislation that allows for these terrible crimes to happen that literally do drive people to suicide. I mean, the lady on here talks about, how austerity has cut benefits and driven people to suicide. I mean, and this is what I mean about the total lack of understanding that she could say that, because I'm sorry, lady, it isn't just people who've had benefits cut that have been driven to suicide. NHS staff are being driven to suicide. They can't cope with the pressures and the workload and the lack of resources available to them. It's people who are being made redundant from their jobs. The 50% of public service workers that have lost their jobs over the last 10 years, who were then expected to go and work for what? 0-hour contracts and have to apply for benefits to pay the council tax. Or having to queue up at a food bank every so often because, your 0-hour contract job has said, oh, we don't need you for the next 2 weeks. Go away. Or because you're being bullied or sexually harassed at work and you can't leave your job because you'll lose your home. It's just pressure after pressure after pressure after pressure placed on people with what amounts to economic terrorism. And these are the terrorists. Because what they've been doing, that is terrorism, attacking people. And I'll leave you a link about Bowden under this, and please watch it, because he's got information on David Cameron being involved in exactly this type of thing, breaking up businesses, selling fake AAA rated shares, selling shares in fake AAA rated companies, money being funneled into offshore accounts, lying to people, stripping pensions through the investments that come when something's AAA rated. It means really, at the very least, you'll get your cash back, but it's not a written agreement, but it means they're very unlikely to fail, AAA rated. I mean, you are talking, it is like counterfeit money when you're selling fake shares in fake AAA rated offshore companies. You are basically using counterfeit money in order to get real money in, real money from pension funds, real money from trust funds, real money from people's savings. It's really sad. And this. I mean, it just spells it out really clearly, you know, exactly what the bank did. And now it seems that the police are looking into it. Are they? Will they do anything about it? Will they do anything about it? Asset stripping. Avon Somerset police ignore fraud. Something similar was done to my mother by Barclays some years ago. Was all this started by Margaret Thatcher deregulating the banks? I mean, they literally released a monster, a financial monster that was just like, yeah, go and help yourself, do what you like, do as you please, all through finance, manipulating the numbers, sharing inside information, making a fast buck. And that's why suddenly the world was suddenly, oh, there's millionaires. The millionaires have increased. The billionaires have increased. But they'll strip and strip and strip and strip and strip because and that is what people need to understand. There isn't a point where they're going to stop, because we are talking about a cancerous psychology. It knows no bounds, it knows no limits. It's a law unto itself. It has no purpose other than to profit, eat, 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 eat. And it needs to fully control the host in order to, you know, stay in power enough to continue eating, to consume. And they're accusing humanity itself. Oh, there's too many people, the earth, you know, the earth cannot sustain them. When actually we are all needed, because this cancerous psychology that is feeding on the human host and our planet right now through the human host, that instead of caring for the planet as we were created to do, we are doing the exact opposite in order to provide care and attention and services and fulfill the every fantasy and desire, no matter how sadistic, of this criminal ruling elite that live outside the law. Apparently they're above it. They're too big to prosecute. They who have judged us a cancer are actually themselves the cancer. And we do need to become more consciously aware of the true picture now. You know, get a grip on an accurate perspective. Because when we understand the problem, that's when we can fix that problem. Because we understand what needs to be done. So what needs to be done then? What needs to be done is what happened in Iceland. Arrest these bankers, bring in the legislation, establish a British national bank that is not owned by any corporation, that's British, that prints British money. Invest in eco-friendly industry, hemp. Invest in hemp, Britain. Start making... Hemp can provide everything. Check it out, Google it. See what you can produce from hemp. Clothing, plastics, oil, food, paper, bricks. You name it, you can produce it from hemp. Soap, medicines, everything. And it's an eco-friendly industry. We need to start getting back to the foundation of what actually makes us human. Because certainly getting rich doesn't appear to be making people human.